Good morning. We will start with our chat. I know your passport, and if I don't, I will guess it. So this is brute force attacks always have attacks, but we might take years to get your password. In the end, we will get it. I'll talk about some of the concepts about who we are. Here's Pablo Caro. My name is Pablo Sánchez. We work in Telefónica at present, as we are part of the red team. I'm a sort of multi-purpose employee. We want to go straight to the point. We have many things to tell you. We want to focus on passwords. And why? Because the issue of passwords, as you know, has evolved a lot, but it continues to be in the foreground, in the headlight. We use them every day. We have publications on passwords and YouTube and images and links. The top 5 leaks, I'd like to emphasize the impact they've had in companies. Just to name a few, the Hue leak there, in which they lost over 1 billion passwords, as well as data like personal data like birth data, safety questions, a lot of data that can be used for other things. Then Yahoo had the year after that, in 2014, they also experienced a theft of their passwords. 2 Russians were arrested. Then we had the adult friend final, which is when people start to get more worried about the issue of leaks. And all this was due to local inclusion. It was widely publicized. And then we had the Equifax, in which they stole from them data of 146 million people. This was published on September 7, and then we had a Marriott scandal. This year, they lost almost 500 million accounts. There was a possible player there. So this was discovered as a real theft and led to a big change in the strategy of many companies. But not only we have these top 5, we also have loads of leaks that have been published in recent years. For example, eBay, where they stole 145 million passwords, Morgan Chase, 176 million of small businesses. In addition, we have Uber, where they stole data of almost 160 million people. They had to pay 100,000 to the kidnappers without having the certainty that they were not going to publish the information they had, if they had it. And the solution they took is they just fired the CSO. Other leaks is the problem of Sony and entertainment online. The Adobe leak, it was 128 million password. LinkedIn, which was very famous. So there are many. So just to get into the subject, what happened with password cracking in the past few years? The graph is a graph relating to the speed of cracking passwords in the 90s, where we use crypts in Linux systems. The number of cracks that can be obtained is very different. In past years, the best thing you could get was a quad core, and you were maybe lucky, and you were able to get a Sun Spark, and you had maybe 4-8 cores. You start hacking passwords, and this was powerful, even though the ratios were very different than nowadays, because because the passwords were not as strong as they are now. Then we had the issue of rainbow tables with landman. They used a hash of 14 characters, letters with caps and small letters. So there were two individual phases, so this led to a new technique, which was the rainbow tables. And then we had John the Ripper with a new variant that used some power of OpenCSL. CUDA was implemented, but for me the biggest leap in this was the core logic, the rule sets. This made up to 10 and 14 characters and were much more difficult to decipher. They used a word like winter 2010, July 2015. It was very easy to get the password. And after that we had the hashcats, public data sets, dictionaries. But the fact of having cracking teams nowadays, one of the parts of DEF CON is simply for hacking passwords. No longer we have only the use of CPUs, but we also can rent instances in the cloud. We don't need to have our machine at home making a lot of noise, but we can get a background running on the cloud while we go about other businesses. Ways to realize that our data have been compromised. Have I been pawned? It is well known for many. And then we have the spy cloud, which has a number of variants with data, domain, and it warns you about these things. Now, there are some concepts where you have to take into account for cracking passwords. The difference between encoding, hashing, and ciphering. Encoding is transforming data to a scheme that is publicly known for use. This is like a one-way cryptographic function that is not possible to revert. You give it an input and it gives you a specific length. And ciphering, you get input data that is reversible through a key. And then we have the key space, the character space, the hash rate per second, and the cracking time. It is also important to consider the various forms of attacks we can have. Dictionary word list attacks. We have the rule attack. We make permutations of the various words we have. The most expensive ones do a sort of brute force, but targeted brute force, where we can allocate a subset of characters. That is, within this set we can have caps, small special characters, and numbers. The hybrid attacks is the combination of a word list and masks, and then brute force. That is, I'm just going out for everything. All space of possible characters, I will attack all types. We have to see what kind of hash we have, how we want to address it, and when we implement it in our machine with the software we have decided to use, and then we start to realize how the passwords operate and how we can adjust them. If we don't get any results, then we start to plan everything again. If it doesn't work with our graph card, we go to an instance of on cloud, Amazon Cloud, for instance. In the worst case, brute force addresses the entire possible space of characters. Why do we use GPUs instead of CPUs? GPU utilizes more ALUs, arithmetic logical units, than a CPU. The GPU can work in parallel, and if with a Xeon with 12 cores, that it would take 108 years, but with a Titan X, we would take 48 days. So there's a huge difference between these type of things. Now, just to give you context, these are the benchmarks, the GPU benchmarks, with an amount of hashes per second. We have a Titan RTX, which is the most powerful in existence, which is 64,019 million hashes per second. When you see this type of cards, well, the difference is that the normal cards are have the cooling, but other cards dissipate heat inside the machine instead of outside the machine. So when we have one running at top speed, the CPU may crash or turn off due to excessive heat. After this, we had the Sagitta Brutalis. We take a load of cards, 8 of it, or 1080 Ti, and we stack them in a machine. So we get the difference with 200 gigahashes per second. And when we thought we could not improve on this, we got the cloud, which is the large unknown that nobody knows where it lives. It's there for everybody. And we get an instance that costs $24 in Amazon. We get a rate of 450 gigahertz per second, totally awe-inspiring speed. In comparison to what we could do in the 90s, the differences are totally off the charts. So we always can use the farm, we can use the equipment, put them in this sort of array. I know many stories of people who are in Siberia and use these teams for mining cryptocurrency and also to warm their homes. So they save on electricity, and on top of that they make money. So it's quite an interesting option, isn't it? For instance, for an example of cracking, if we have a special characters, caps and small letters, and we have this generated by a password manager, we would have all these possible combinations, these trillions, 60 trillions, huge amount of possible combinations. Now, if we utilize an instance of Amazon like we saw earlier with 450,000 million hashes per second, we will take 4 years and 266 days and 23 hours to sort it out, with a cost of $347,000. As this is not feasible, we said, okay, what do we have to do? We should do something that will help us to avoid reaching these extremes. So we thought of a new approach that is related to lead password cracking, with compiling information, lots of information of people, to carry out targeted attacks and use a bit of our brain. So what was the film? Shihiro. Shihiro has a power to generate gold pips, so everybody wants to help him. Ghost runs out of control, he grows huge, so then we have billions and billions of possible records. We can call it this way. So then we got a funny result, an interesting result. For us, this is Kaunashi, which is an engine in which you can look for, make searches with loads of different variables. For example, length of password, the most expensive ones are quite specific. Per password per user. For instance, we can look for domains in Kaspersky.com. And what I get here is all the data we have of all the links that are there. And we have the possible password, the length, the mask. We can also, let's see if we can ask Kaunashi, Kaonashi.user. Eugene Kaspersky, for instance. We already found them in password, the most expensive one. Here we have implemented a modified engine of a CVVN that belongs to Dropbox, which analyzes the password, gives you possible entropy estimates, whether it is in a list of known words, how long it would take, etc. But what we did was integrate this with a part of social Scripper that uses all the data we get from the deep web, from the internet, of all social media, LinkedIn, and we develop these patterns. So with this information, we have a lot of useful information about each participant. Here, Eugene Kaspersky has one that is called Yubijaki Kaspersky. So there's an interesting one here. One yellow, one white to yellow. We can consider variations over to red to green, and we can obtain a lot more information. If we put domain Kaonashi, domain, I just made it up, ozone.com. Here we have Roman. So he was, Roman was telling me that he was like the devil. Anyway, let's see what we have here with a social script. We have lots of candidates, but lots of information on the company, the things they're doing, user IDs, possibly some telephone numbers. So we start getting more data. For example, the historic, the diplomats. Let's look for diplomats. This was funny because here, diplomats, here we got the, here we get a password that says fuck everybody, which is not a very diplomatic password for a diplomat. So using our database, we see he was ambassador in France and Cairo, in London. We don't have any phone numbers. The person who told them about this, well, they got a bit upset, so they decided not to volunteer for examining passwords. So then we decided to leave it aside. A couple of examples. So you can see, I hope you can see the small print. There's someone that is related to Europol with a password of a little wing, where we have a number of little wing, this one that is associated there. This is for the FBI apparently. So there are many things that we don't know if they are real. We have, for example, so using this part we can get valid information. We have seen that this user is an analyst of the FBI. We have his password. The account exists. It says linked to additional services. For instance, Nikita is the person who is in. To give you a different example, he is responsible for the DEF-CON conference. And finally, this is the final example. This is the CIA. Many mails that were rather suspicious, but here we have different email addresses that are shown here that are allocated to John Rizzo, yes. Apart from this, in Kaonashi we have collected, Pablo will explain the details on this, neural networks, etc. But the first tests that we generated has given us a difference. We have broken with the 866 million unique passwords. If we compare this with 16 million Kaunashis, again 14 million of the tube rock U, we get well, there's a difference. But things change when you introduce some sort of rule. So we went from 1169 to 1047 of rock U. We made these tests for the remaining hashes of the grid. This was published in 2014, and since then we've been working with it. Less than 4% of hashes to be decrypted. So we started breaking a few things, and we saw a high percentage of success. I'm not going to say who helped us, but many companies have donated their hashes without knowing. So to avoid going to jail, I will only say that apart from LinkedIn, we have done tests in real life, and we get some very interesting results. Now, statistically, mean password, 9 characters. The average length of each word depends on the language we're using. And on average, a person uses maybe 150,000 words. Women use more personal names. Men use hobbies. If they use numbers, it's 1, 2, and they're generally placed at the end. If they're more numbers, it is like a sequential progression or something that has meaning for the user. And there's caps and small print, small letters is generally at the beginning. Oriental countries use more numbers than Western countries. We have the 20-60-20 rule, which means that 20% of the passwords are very easy, and then 60% have some variations and mutations, which are average difficulty, and then we have a last 20% which is quite difficult because they're complex, because they're long, there are many special characters, so this is up to work on. So, problems we found is that, well, what do we do with a foreign language? We have the problem that we are used to use Latin characters. So when we get to something that is Cyrillic, we have to use an UTF-8. The difference is that you have an ASC2 character, and you go from UTF-8, you use from 1 to 4 because the capital A in Russia uses D090, so there's a base code and a character code. To crack passwords, we have to look for all the combinations on a UTF table, and we say from D80 to D4BF, this is where we find the characters in the Cyrillic field. Quite simple. A mask, it's quite simple. It's the hashtag that we also use things in Chinese. If we don't know what the language is and we want to crack it, we have to use the 256 bytes to get all the possible combinations. But if we have loads of characters, we can use the 256 bytes for everything. This is direct brute force. So we have some interesting problems. The difference between languages. Greek. What we have here is a word that means hunter, and we have two variants, those belonging to modern Greek, and I think there is the Greek list, which is written in Greek but with ASC2 characters. So we have two variants. We can write Greek in UTF-8 or as OSC2. So in the Greek list, we have different styles of writing permutations. We can also pronounce it in syllables of 4 forms completely differently. So what can we do? A variation in Python, where we substitute this type of characters and we start obtaining permutations without having to use any hashtag rule. Then we get many hits. You have two types of Chinese, traditional or simplified. One is used in Taiwan and Hong Kong, and the rest in continental China. the same problem. If it's in simplified Chinese or Western characters, we can write the same with different encoding, but we have the same word in different systems. Characteristics of the Chinese language, which we have found out, which helped us to break passwords, because 16% of the world population speaks Chinese. Within the top, this is a position in position 25, which is not usual, and this is because of the homophony, how do you pronounce a number, and how similar is it to an actual word. Here we have registries, but basically, if you see the pronunciation of each number, it looks like a number of words that means I love you forever and ever. So from now on, I will send my girlfriend these numbers. Now we have a complication, a further complication. 520 is I love you, and it's in the leaks that we never understood why. But this I love you in the part of the traditional or simplified Chinese. So we are finding many variants. And when we make phonetic transcriptions, like Binyong Ji, that is means you're welcome, Mandarin Chinese, and another one is the phonetic system of the Czech Republic, this famous password, which is J53 whatever, which is used, which means is precisely what is it is the word that means password in the Czech language. So there are many things that we can do with these methods. We have, for example, word lists from several places, from Aspel, from the Twitter global feed, and what has happened here, it's not stopping. So we get it out from Wikipedia, Reddit. For example, for Roman, we did a screening of all the tweets he's published, where he works, all the social information we have, and then we generate word lists that are targeted to him. They're not global words. It's not Ferrovial 1970. By the way, I have to tell you something about that company, Ferrovial. Another thing that we can do is the keyboard walking, which is do like this in the word, and then use that as a password. Within the top 100 includes 1, 2, 3, 4, ASGF, according to the QWERTY keyboard. We have this is keyboard walking. We have all the patterns we can find there. But in addition to that, it depends on the layout you're using, because the Russian layout has this pattern. You also have this one. The arrangement of characters is different, but in UTF they would be easier to break. Here we find a complicated pattern, another one that is even more complicated to break together with a good bottle of vodka. My father is Russian, so I'm totally free to talk about that. So we have a different arrangement, but we have patterns that are used, very interesting patterns, but who would ever use things like this Borjak layout? In the leaks there loads of keyboard walk-ins made on the basis of the keyboard arrangement. Before Pablo comes on, we will talk just a little about masks.
We have applied masks for Eastern countries and for Western countries. Western countries tend to use more letters than words, than numbers. So Chinese find it easier to use numbers than characters, because for them, ASC2 characters are very strange. And this is the frequency of the distribution. This is the difference between English and Chinese, and you may see that some of the masks are very likely to show like three small case letters plus 3 numbers, etc. And then the masks that we may apply to extract patterns give us lots of information about people behind them. And let us say, okay, let us try this regular or this habitual expression. Let us do a search of masks, and then we will be finding one with 8 digits and a letter. And then the results is like high number of people whose password is their ID card number. So this is what a start. And then not only that, but also just as a password, the telephone number, the address. So this is very, very risky. And then we may also get like social security number from the US. Many of the passwords follow that pattern. And not only that, we also find telephones. Pablo yesterday thought that he was a good person and I was the bad guy. And then he asked me to call this number to see whether that was my number. So we have telephone numbers, people, of mobile telephone numbers. We also have telephone numbers from Madrid, starting off with 91. And this is 958. This is landline from Granada, 257 results. So I didn't know that in Malaga you only had, I didn't know that you had landline number. And I thought that you only had a beer brand different from Mao. So what else can we do with masks? We can do very many interesting things. Let us go in deeper into the analysis. Pablo will tell you more about it. Okay, let us see how all that translates into real world. I will be rushing because we don't have lots of time left. Well, you have 25 minutes. Every time I make a cracking with a password with a quick hash, I do this. This is a mask that will remove all the passwords with 6 characters or less than that. So approximately there are like hundreds of thousands of millions of key spaces. So how long does it take me to go through all that? If I have the 2080 that Jaime mentioned before, that is to say creating like 50 million hashes per second, it takes 15 seconds. That is under ideal conditions. We are talking about benchmark conditions where we are checking that against one hash only. This is very important because if I'm cracking, I'm not cracking one hash only, but a pool of hashes, that we are talking about hundreds of thousands of hashes. And this is relevant because the checks that the actual hardware will have to do will be slower as a function of the number of hashes to be checked out. And the equipment you are using for your cracking cannot be used for anything else. So still, yet we will shift from 15 seconds. Let us say we will multiply by 5 over 8, and then in the end will be a couple of minutes. And now, when we go to 8 characters, we are starting to have a higher workload. So again, 50,000 million hashes per second, and in the benchmark conditions, we are talking about 40 hours. If we multiply that, that will be too long time to, and then we are talking about MD5, which is one of the fastest ones to crack, and the only ones that I've been using up until now are the Unix ones. So we have a SHA 512 crypt. Now I have 350,000 Ks per second. So we are talking about 60 and 653 years, and this is exponential because I have to increase it by 2 orders of magnitude. So now I'm taking 42 years in MD5. And then if I use SHA-512 crypt, that would take me 6 million years. And then, well, in 6 million years' time, hopefully I will be retired. So therefore, we have to go around it, and we have to be cleverer, and we have to give more thought to it. First of all, we would like to try the least number of times possible, and we want our attempts to be as successful as possible. So the least checks I will make, the better. The faster I will go. As I say, I want to be faster in my checking. And then if my mask is well oriented, I may end up with all the hashes before I go through all the key spaces. How do I do it? Well, I have to set two objectives. First of all, I have to fine-tune the masks. So, for instance, if I have an engagement and I have achieved lots of hashes from the user, and I know that in the company the password policies, capital letters, small caps, numbers, is that, well, no, well, 1U letter, 1A, and I can get to it. But if I don't have that information about the password policy, I can just try out the most likely masks. We have counted all the masks that we have found, and we have arranged them by likeliness, and they are indexed on the page. You can make an indexed search. Out of the 10 most likely masks, only those 10 allow me to crack 9% of the 9 out of 10 of passwords. If we go back to the prior numbers, if we were talking about MD5, the time will be less than an hour, which is reasonable. And we will be publishing it. We will be publishing all the masks in this study, just in case someone wants to use it. The second objective that we want to take into account is the following. If I'm going to go through all that space keys, let us arrange it. Why do I want the likeliness, the most likely hashes, to be right at the beginning, so that I can go faster. And it could even happen that by the time I get halfway through, we'll be done. And now let us see what happens now. So these two passwords have the same masks, like one capital letter, 4 small case letters, and then 3 numbers. So one of them appears in the top masks. So Markov chains were implemented within the cracking program. And what are Markov chains? These are a stochastic model which are often used to arrange the key space so that the most likely ones are in the beginning. So it analyzes the character which often appears after a B letter. Okay, I go back now. Here we see that after a B letter, in 90% of the cases, we get an A, and only in 5% of the cases we get a C letter. Therefore, out of all the key space, I will put the ones with BA in the beginning, and those with BC, I will place them in the end. I will do that with all the possibilities, but take into account that you do that for every single character in the dictionary. Even so, there comes a time that masks stop being efficient. So this makes sense for short masks. And in short, then we have to give more thought to it. Same as users. Well, users kind of enter as a password a proper name, the name of the pet or something that is around them. For instance, if they're having breakfast, they say banana. But then the grandmother says, no, this is not secure enough. And then the user says, okay, I will complicate it. I will make it more secure. Then I will add a cup. And then, because the grandma have seen the movie, and I say, okay, this is not secure enough. And I said, okay, I will replace all the A letters with a 4. And then to apply maximum level of security, I add this question mark. So the user has mutated a word to turn it into a password. And we can express those rules in a manner that we are shifting from a word to a password. So for us, well, we use the C for capitalize, which is to say the first letter is a cap, and then the rest are small case or lowercase. So you can do that with every single password, with every single word you can think of, and you can make it as long as you can think of. And then we just add more and more mutation rules. Many of these rules are well-known, industry standards, and they are used because they have proven to be effective. And actually, these ones are distributed with hashtags. So they come in a folder known as rules. But we said we have over 3,000 registered, 886 million of unique passwords. Why don't we start drawing conclusions? Why don't we try to deduct the rule that a user has used to get to here? We count those rules and we will arrange them in order. So therefore, the most, the highest or the most used rules will appear on top. Well, because password comes from a word. To determine the mutation rules that have been used, we really need to know which is the original word. And finding that out is not that easy. What do we do for that? Well, we do several things here. The first thing that we could do is just to do an actual count, a static analysis of the mutation. I create this data structure, and then I analyze each of the password, whether it finishes with an exclamation mark or it starts off with a capital letter. And I count every single password that I find. So Daniel 1123, then because this starts off with a cap, I just replace it. And I do this for every single password. This allows me to draw conclusions. So whenever a word is transformed into a password, I can see which is the final password. However, this password with an internal mutation in them, this static analysis is not good anymore. Then I need to do something else. In that case, I want to use PAC. PAC is a really good tool. It's a project uploaded in GitHub. And one of the parts is RuleGen, which is rule generator, which has exactly the same purpose. That is to say, deducting the word, the original word, and the rules that were applied. To get a password, try to deduct the original word, and then decide which rules were applied. The problem with PAC is once you try it, well, sometimes it tries a lot, sometimes it tries not that much. So here we clearly see that the word is opportunity, something has been changed, capital letter, and then an @ sign. Then it tells me that it comes from opportunist word. But it uses an English dictionary. It is not good for us. And I say, well, we need it in Spanish. And then if I go and tell them password, it tells me that it comes from pasador. No, it probably comes from password, not from pasador word. So because PAC does not implement, does not detect the language, cannot compare it against any specific dictionary. And actually, if we give it a personalized dictionary, we could give that to PAC, including words from different languages. PAC doesn't really know which direction to follow, and the results are not that good. And sometimes, well, let us say Katsibache and 3 replaces the last letter, which was an E letter. But then PAC says, no. Actually, what has been changed is that the 9th position has been replaced with 3. Does this rule make sense? Yes, this rule has been applied, but probably the user did not go through that rule. And actually the same rule is applied to another word which also has a E letter in the same position. Doesn't really make sense. So therefore, PAC results were not that good. And there is no other way to do it but through cracking. So we can deduct the mutation rule by using hashtags. We get a dictionary. We add very many mutation rules, very many mutation rules. And then we go to debug mode for. Debug mode for, when hashtag finds the match, gets in the file the original word, the mutation rule, as well as the final word. After cracking very many hashes using this technique, I go to the debug file, I take all the rules and I count them. The rules that were bad, let's use put them in the end. And then it allows me to create specific rules, mutation rules that are not for general purposes, but rules which are good enough specifically for specific words, or specific rules for password, for RootedCON, for any other. Because if I'm cracking base dictionary, that will be, the conclusions will be referring to the base dictionary. And then, if I add Spanish dictionary, I can deduct mutation rules that can be applied to the Spanish dictionary. If I do an engagement with Spanish companies, it's very good to use this rule. So good results came from here. The first analysis was a static analysis. Yubaba 64. That was the result. So this is very good for words, precisely for what I've just told you, because static analysis is about getting a word and see how it starts and how it finishes. And then we added 64 because we only used the 64 most frequent or most likely rules. If you go over 64, it becomes less and less efficient. The 64 one, many people use them, adding 1, 2, 3, adding an exclamation mark in the end. At the end, does this work? Yes, it works. For Open Wall Dictionary, we are getting 1.4% improvement versus best 64. So the very same entry. Well, this pool of rules works better than in best 64. But in other places, this doesn't work as well. For instance, Wikipedia. And I said before that this is good for words. What is the repercussion of that? Because if we apply RootedCON, then minus 12.2% words. And best 64 is good for words only. We cannot use best 64 for general purposes, but we can continue extracting rules. Haku, we get that from tracking. We use as base words and not passwords, and the results here are very cool. By using Wikipedia in Spanish, there is nearly an improvement of 30% versus that one. I use that one because it includes like 34,000 rules of mutation. And then in case of Wikipedia in English, 25.7 improvement versus that one. That one is one of the industry standards. And Kamaji, similar, but instead of using words from Wikipedia, we use them, words come from RootedCON, which is another industry standard. And Kanoashi, 14 million passwords. So we are seeing improvements between 10 and 13% here. So these rules will also be published. The set of rules that we are finding will be published for those of you who would need to use them for your cracking. Well, if you paid attention, you said that you are going to draw or extract rules for Spanish. Yes, but curiously enough, those rules that are good for Spanish language coincide very much with those rules that are good for languages for words in other languages. That is to say, Spanish speakers tend to use the same mutations than Anglo-Saxon speakers. And that's the reason why we did not extract any specific pool for Spanish language. Jaime mentioned before that 20, 60, 20. There comes a time that I have exhausted all the dictionary, all the mutation rules. I cannot really use any more masks because it would take years and years, but I want to keep on going deeper and deeper, getting more and more because we may reach the admin account. So getting down to that last 20% is very, very difficult. Lots of hard work has been done just to get hashes out of that 20%. A good way to do it is through combination attacks. Instead of one dictionary, we take two dictionaries. I will be combining the words of both dictionaries. Or hybrid attacks, that is to say, a dictionary plus a mask, either at the beginning or at the end. But if the mask is very long and the dictionary is very long, we are again in trouble. I need to fine-tune that. Or random rules. Hashcard allows me to implement random rules. If you're lucky, mutation rules will be generated. So here we are coming at a point that if we get one more hash, we will be already successful. Or Prince. Not this Prince, but this other Prince. Prince was an attack made by a guy working in the Hashcard project, which is about getting a dictionary, putting it in memory, and then in each line, password is made up based on those elements. So for instance, if in the dictionary you have a number of words with length 4, then you just add up 2 words of length 4, and then you come up with one of length 8. And then you rotate all the elements or each positions, and then this gets more and more complicated the longer you make it, because you will have more combinations. Or sometimes you will not get a sum of 4, because you cannot really sum up 4 if the word has a length of 5 positions. But this is never, well, there is always that 20% left. Once I was at home browsing the internet, or for some reason I came up to this article. Title is The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Recurrent Neural Networks. And I said, well, unreasonable. I read the article, and then this is about creating a recurrent neural network that gets a text from Shakespeare, and then the result looks like the Shakespeare text, has the same structure. And I said, okay, I will try it. I will just input Spanish proverbs. And then the results look like proverbs. This looks like a proverb, isn't it? But we don't say that because this doesn't really make sense. Okay, let's take a look at this example. If I use Romance tweets, the results will be very similar to Romance tweets. And the conclusions here are very interesting. It tries to replicate the structure, not the meaning of it. So, for instance, we have Sigo in brackets, neural network places it at the end of the statement. So these are short statements, maximum 280 characters. I used several tweets published by Roman. Notice the emoticons. So the structure of this statement is starting off with a capital letter, finishing off with point. And what happens if I input passwords? Passwords that have been generated by humans. Well, the results will be similar to human passwords. So a neural network fed by the first million of Kaunashi passwords that found, but a bit filtered. And all those with a length of 5 or less than that. And these were the results, and this is very rich. These are the results with the first million, but I can fine-tune it more. And I said, I will add passwords with a length of 14 or more. And these are the results. They look like that. And then if I include Spanish words, the results look like Spanish words. None of those words exist. I looked them all up, but they could perfectly be Spanish words. That really makes sense, could be Spanish words, but they are not. They do not exist in the Spanish dictionary. And even more interesting, if I get a word, if I want to do a pattern testing to RootedCON organizer, I get the word and I input it in a pool of mutation rules. And then what do I get as a result? I get things that are similar to the mutated word, which at the same time is similar to the original word. So that word helps me extract, in theory, infinite number of combinations. There will come a time that I start to see repetitions, but it gives me lots of freedom. And now, does this truly work? Actually, papers have been written, and now let us take a look at the actual results. So the first result example that I showed you, and I said, well, 106,000 passwords came up as a result. 15% came from the set of training. That is to say, what we have entered as an input. So we removed those ones because we knew this one. And now we are left with 90,000. Out of those 90,000, 1/3 of them, nearly 30,000, were presenting Kaonasi. In the whole pool of Kaonasi, let us give a thought to it. That Kaonasi in full. So if we implement a neural network, I'm finding 30,000 passwords that cannot be potentially included by a human. That means that the remaining 60,000 could be entered by a human, but I don't have them. But that does not make them any more valid. And these are the ones that I will be using for whatever engagement I would like to make. We use all those techniques to crack what Jaime mentioned before, those linking hashes. Not that the last 20%, but the last 40%. That's what we've been trying to go deeper and deeper. By using combination of these techniques, we managed to break 347 hashes more. So 347 after 4 years of having people trying to crack those hashes. And we were successful. So these ones from this morning, every time I launch it, I get a new hash by using combinations of the results from the Prince attack, from neural networks. I'm getting more and more hashes. And actually, I just left it at home, sending out launches to see whether I get any more hashes. Well, I don't want you to crack me. What do I do for that? Well, we can take different perspectives here. Well, on the side of blue team, administrators, what should I do so that I'm not cracked? First of all, you have to use the slow hashes, not MD5, bcrypt, script, etc. Second, you have to use salted hashes. Well, I did not explain salt. Salt is a small chain that you add to the entry word. That is a random chain, and it allows you to change the hash. If I hash Pablo twice, and then I use different salts, the hashes that are generated are different. So if I have a lookup table, such as rainbow, or the table that we generated before, lookup table, so the hashes will not be found on that table. And then the user should be obliged to use multiple factors of authentication. If I'm a user, well, I will not be cracked if I use multiple factors of authentication. And then I will have two options. Either I use long enough passwords, random passwords, or I can also use correct course battery stable. You are giving me a strange face, but this is a very famous comic strip which very well summarizes a very good technique for you to generate secure passwords. It is about including common words in a random manner. So that adds to the level of security. If you think about the techniques that we used before, how we can break these password correct host battery is stable, you will have to use specific dictionaries, this and that. That would be very, very complicated to crack. And, well, that's all from us. We are happy to take any questions that you may have.
Impresionante, espectacular, la verdad. Enhorabuena. Recordad que para hacer las preguntas
Impressive. Remember that you have to use the microphones that are located at the front in various areas. We have a cryptographer here.
Una preguntilla rápida, por curiosidad.
One quick question. For the mutation rules, have you used similar rules used by searchers? You meant to say this word instead of that word, that kind of thing. I don't know actually how they do it. I imagine they have a big dictionary of words that have been used recently. We haven't tried to apply it, but it's a good idea actually. The other doubt is related to what you commented about neural networks. Have you take a look at PASGAN? PASGAN improves those results. The paper of PASGAN, which was implemented, the paper didn't give any results, and the training didn't demonstrate it was better than using recurring neural networks. In real-world tests, I didn't find it was better. Okay, that was all. Thank you. Further questions? I can't see you because some people are blocking the view of the microphones. Well, first, brilliant presentation, one of the best I've seen. The part related to password cracking is quite clear. I had a question more on sourcing. How do you relate several email accounts to the same user? This is a part of a project we have that makes a stripper, deep web, user things from social media. So this is a mix of a bunch of things. You say, hey, this fits in with that. And look, there's commonalities. So we have different sources. For example, Leak has 3,700 million of records. We also have an Elastic that is also working with 4 clusters. Each one does different things. So we have relationships of different projects. We can see it, but it's very complicated to give you an answer. So, congratulations. Thank you very much. No further questions, apparently. I have one on the neuronal network. I think you should give more time to that. I don't mean to that you haven't worked enough on it. I would focus on other inputs to get passwords, which I think is a very interesting thing. We can talk about this privately later on. Anyway, thank you very much.